this session of Win-Loss Week. We're really excited to be here today to talk about something that is really close to John and I. The title of our session, if you will, is the 8 gotchas of running a win-loss program. So we're going to talk through what are some of the key things that will make your win-loss program successful. So first of all, I'm Braydon Anderson. I'm the VP of Operations here at Clozd. And so my job is to run all the back-end stuff to make sure our clients' win-loss programs are super successful. I'm here today with Jonathan Stevens.
Yeah, thanks, Braydon. So my name's Jonathan Stevens. I'm the Vice President of Consulting here at Clozd. So my job is to help train and manage the consultants that run our win-loss programs for our clients. And it's a great job. Love working at Clozd and really excited to be here talking about this today.
Yeah, we got a lot of fun stuff that we, again, feel really passionate about. And so really, John and I have had a lot of experience running a lot of win-loss programs. We've both been at Clozd for almost the entire duration of the company. And so we've seen a lot in that time. And we've seen a lot of good and we've seen a lot of bad. So what we want to do is we want to take what we have seen as the good from these win-loss programs and share some of those insights with you. So that you can start your win-loss program quickly and successfully, whether you're doing it yourself or if you're using a third party like Clozd. You'll be able to get a lot of good insight out of today's session. So let's dive into it, John.
Yeah, sounds great. So we're going to go through 8 main points, and the first one is the first thing that I guess is a gotcha of win-loss programs is that clients don't have clear objectives of what they want to get out of the win-loss program. So this might seem kind of self-explanatory. And it might seem obvious that when you start a win-loss program, you clearly know what you want to get out of it. But it's surprising that in a handful of scenarios, when we start these programs with people, they don't actually know what they're trying to get out of it. They say at the outset, yeah, we want to find out why we win and lose. That's pretty obvious. And often it's competitive intelligence. Often they have a few strategic objectives that they're trying to meet, but the best win-loss programs are more specific and concrete in how people approach them and what strategic objectives they're trying to achieve.
So is that would you say that's maybe a specific question or problem that they're trying to solve that they need win-loss insights to go and nail down?
Yeah, exactly. A specific question, or one thing is, they might have a specific part of their buyer base that they just don't understand really well. So saying we want to know why we win and lose is step 1. Step 2 is saying we really want to know why we win and lose against competitor X in Europe or in North America, right?
So maybe being a little more specific is part of what you're saying.
Yeah, you can get too specific as well,
sure.
But I think having those specifics can really help you carve out what you want to get out of this program, and ultimately will make it more successful at the end of the day.
Yeah, I like that. One of the key things that kind of goes along with that we also see is you don't really have a lot of internal buy-in through other maybe key stakeholders throughout the organization when you get started. What we've seen is we work with a lot of marketing teams more than others. We work with a lot of sales, a lot of product, a lot of leadership teams, but we find ourselves working with a lot of marketing and specifically product marketing. And it's really important for those individuals to make sure that they're working with sales and product and the leadership team before they go and start running these programs. And I think that can now actually help your first point is if you're working with these other teams, they're also going to give some input on what are some of the key objectives that they would care from the outset of a win-loss program. And so we've just found that as you work with these other teams in the kickoff process and before you actually start and get their input on maybe what questions to ask and what problems they're trying to solve, you're going to have more success throughout the entire win-loss program because they're going to be invested in it from day one, rather than maybe you go get a bunch of feedback and you take it and say, hey, sales team, we just did a bunch of win-loss interviews and everything says that you're doing a terrible job at your job. Here's some feedback to how to go get better. They're probably not going to be as receptive to that versus if they're invested from day one, they're helping create and shape what that win-loss program can look like. They're going to be more willing and open to that type of feedback that we may get from these win-loss interviews.
Yeah, totally. I've seen scenarios where, what you just described will happen, right? The product marketer will run the win-loss program. Inevitably, there will be some negative feedback about certain aspects of the yes, and about certain aspects of the sales organization. But then what's interesting is they'll bring it over to the salespeople, and the salespeople will say, "What's the win-loss program?"
Yeah.
And you just, it's cringeworthy. It really is. You need to get buy-in, and like Braydon said, it goes hand in hand with having clear objectives. Your objectives should be aligned with other key stakeholders in the organization, right? So I like that point, Braydon.
Yeah. What else? What else are you seeing, John?
Yeah. So here's another key point that I think is critical. It's pretty straightforward, but people limit too much the number of contacts they try to reach out to in their win-loss program. So let's say you go out and your objective is to do 20 win-loss interviews. You're not going to get there with 18 contacts. I know that seems obvious, but we've seen that before, right? So we've been working with clients. We say, okay, we're going to do 20 interviews. We get a list, and they say, okay, well, here's 17 contacts, and you're like, wait a second, there's a little bit of a disconnect here. I mean, what we've been able to achieve at Clozd is around a 20% response rate across all of our clients. In some programs, it's even better. I just finished a program where the response rate was over 40%.
Wow.
But it's better to err on the safe side.
Sure.
You want to have a lot of people you're going to reach out to, and so don't bite off more than you can chew.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're getting enough feedback to get useful insights. But if you want to set out to do 50 interviews, you're probably not going to get there with 60 names. You need a lot more contacts than that.
Yeah, and I think a way to do that, John was talking earlier about your objectives when you get started. Maybe it's a specific competitor in a specific region. There's a fine line between being really specific with the sample and being able to make sure you can get enough interviews. And what we've seen is it's okay to let that sample change over time. Like maybe one quarter, it's this specific buyer segment that you're looking at, but that might change next quarter. And that opens up the door for a lot more contacts that you can potentially reach out to. And so being adaptive with your sample will also allow you to have a lot more names.
Yeah, totally.
So it's really being realistic about participation rate. And what we've seen as a third party is we traditionally will get a higher participation rate than if somebody maybe runs it themselves, because they might be a little bit more willing to talk to a third party, is what we've seen. And so those are just some of the things to consider as you're really starting, and how many names do we actually need to go get X amount of interviews in a certain time period.
Yeah, and it's a little bit counterintuitive. I mean, you'd think, why would they talk to a third party? And it's because they weren't involved in that sales process that you were part of, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing, and often people don't believe it at first, but then once we get into programs, they realize, wow, people are actually talking to you more frequently, and they're sharing things that are just more revealing. They're being more candid with a third party. Because when they've been working with a salesperson and working with the company for a while, even then when they chose not to purchase, they don't want to share all of the nitty-gritty details, and they don't want to give constructive feedback in some cases, but they might be a little bit more open to doing that with a third party that at least appears a little bit more neutral.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Some of these things we first talked about are kind of maybe big picture stuff as you're starting a program. The next one we want to talk about is a little bit more of the tactical day-to-day. And what the gotcha is ineffective reach out. And what we mean by that is when you have the contacts that you're going to reach out to, how do you actually get them to engage in conducting an interview? So there are kind of a couple of key areas that we wanted to highlight there. The first one is doing a survey before actually trying to do the interview. At Clozd, our methodology is we believe that you should do the interview first, followed by a post-interview survey if you're going to do a survey at all. And some of the reason for that is to have a better participation rate across all the interviews. But another side is, from a research methodology standpoint, when you are doing two forms of research, it's typically best to get the one that you care most about to be conducted first, which in our case, we believe that the win-loss interview, while a survey is valuable, we believe the win-loss interview can merit a lot more valuable data. And so we believe that's more valuable than maybe a survey. And so we would err on having that done first, so that we're not maybe biasing individuals with that type of feedback. And if any bias is happening, it's going to happen on the survey rather than on the interview. And so that's one way that people have ineffective reach out. Another way is they're just not persistent. I think a lot of people think that you send one email and they're our customer, or they were part of this evaluation, they're gonna sign up for sure off of one email. we don't want to share the exact numbers of what maybe we reach out with, but it's much more than one. And so what I would recommend is have a cadence to where you're going to be a little bit more persistent than what you originally think you need to be when trying to get these people to reach out.
Right. And do you think people, do you find people get annoyed with all that outreach? I mean, what's the right balance of being persistent but not driving people crazy?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because I think a lot of people would think instantly, like, if I'm being too persistent, it's going to annoy people and they're not going to. And we really don't see that much. I think people understand that there's a value to this type of feedback and their feedback specifically back to the organization. And so we've had a couple of instances over the years where people get annoyed, and I think that's expected. But all in all, our persistence level has been good, and it's being persistent without being overbearing, right? If you're sending 20 emails, one every day, like that's probably a little too much. But if you're spacing it out and having a good balance of that, I think most people respect the persistent reach out. So
yeah.
The last thing with that kind of goes hand in hand with the persistent reach out is just incentives. We do a lot of research here on our programs of how effective incentives may or may not be to increasing the participation rate. And again, we've found a pretty good balance there of having an incentive is valuable. Now, having too large of an incentive doesn't bring a lot of merit. And so what we recommend is just make sure you're doing some level of an incentive to maybe help persuade these individuals to do that. But what I'd caveat that with is just know that the people that actually want to give feedback are going to give it anyway, regardless of what the incentive amount is. And so the incentive is good to help maybe persuade some of the sample, but most of the people that are going to be willing to do this are just going to be willing regardless of that financial incentive.
Yeah, totally. And like Braydon said, I mean, often that isn't the only driving factor, but it's interesting. What we've seen is that we've run programs, for example, where most of a client's buyers are state and local governments, and they can't accept incentives, which we totally respect, and we don't give incentives in those cases. But inevitably, the response rates are just much lower. So, if you want to try to run a program like this without an incentive, you're going to need a lot more people to reach out to before you get some bites.
Yeah.
Having just a little bit, that usually tips the scales to get people motivated to just spend a half an hour to talk to you.
Yeah. So, John, once we get an interview actually scheduled, then what? What's kind of a gotcha at this point?
Yeah. So good question. So it's really goes into the way the interview is actually conducted. There's different schools of thought on this, and at Clozd, what we really recommend is do an adaptive interview. So what that means is you're not following a script asking the same questions every time. So why is that important? The reason for that is because we want to be able to understand at the very essence why a decision was made. When you know why a decision was made, that's what's most valuable to our clients. We found they want to know why did you choose to purchase or not purchase this particular product. What you can get into the trap of is if you have a list of questions that you ask every time, you can actually miss that. You can get done with your conversation, and if somebody asks you why did they win and lose, you don't even know.
And we've seen that. Like we've seen situations where maybe other individuals are conducting their own win-loss interviews and they try to keep it very rote, and they can't answer that question at the end of the day of like, why did they make this decision? Why did you win or lose this deal? And at Clozd, like that's what we care most about, is being able to answer that question. If I come to John after he conducts an interview and he can't answer that question, we don't think he's doing his job right.
No, not doing my job right. So yeah, and the other thing is, you need the flexibility to focus on the things that matter, right? You might, let's say you understand the core reason, but then you waste 20 minutes on a whole bunch of other things that just didn't affect the decision that much. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to have the flexibility to really dig deep on what are the specific product features that matter the most, or how could pricing be configured in a way that would make this particular offering more attractive. You want to be able to dig in on those things and really be an active listener to understand what's going on inside this person's head, so then you can relate it back to the stakeholders that care about this.
Yeah, I think our standpoint is we just don't want to overbake the process, make it too much of a research effort. While this is research, we want to make sure it's much more adaptive. And like we have situations where maybe the buyer wants to give a ton of feedback about the sales experience and no feedback about the product, because that's what their experience was. That's what we want to learn about, because we know we're going to have other buyers that are going to give a ton of feedback about the product and maybe a little feedback about the sales experience because that's where they had the most experience. And to us, that's what we're looking for. We want to have a really clear picture of what their experience was like and what led to their decision criteria.
Totally.
So,
What else, Braydon? What are some of the
yeah.
other gotchas?
Yeah, along that same line with the interviews, this is so simple, honestly, but we see this when, especially when people are maybe running their own programs, they don't think through this as much, but it's simply recording the interview. And that's so basic to us, but I think a lot of people think they can get away with maybe taking notes throughout the conversation, and that is good enough. Whereas we believe that you got to record that whole conversation, and obviously getting the permission of the person that you're interviewing, but getting the recording allows you to not forget anything. It also allows you to focus on the interview and really focus on which follow-up questions to ask rather than trying to take a ton of notes and then also trying to think of what's a good follow-up question and you're probably missing stuff. It's just safer to record the interview and then take notes throughout, but at a much more manageable level.
Yeah, totally. Well, and the other thing about it is when you're going to go relay what you find to stakeholders, they need to know what the buyer said. And if they're just looking at your notes, your credibility goes down the tube. You need to be able to tell them this is exactly what the buyer said in their words. If you have your notes, any stakeholder is going to say, well, this is just your interpretation. How much bias is there in here? Having an actual quote from a customer about what they said, it takes all that bias out. And that's what we try to focus on when we're relating it to our clients. We can have all the interpretation that they want, but when we can actually give them quotes of what the buyer said, it has so much more weight and it can make your program so much more impactful.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great addition there.
Yeah. So the other thing, this is another kind of gotcha, is not tagging key trends in the interviews. So there's a couple of things you can get out of a win-loss program. And one is you can find out what happened on an individual deal. But I think what most people are looking to get out of this is they're looking to see the bigger picture, right? They're looking to try to understand across all of our deals, what's going on? What are the trends? Maybe one deal was lost because there was an M&A situation and the company got acquired and they forced them to change certain vendors that they used, right? In some cases that could be a trend, but in most cases it's kind of a one-off, right? What you want to see is things that are consistent across deals or patterns, right? Because then you can go in with the confidence to say, okay, this is a pattern, this is a trend. Here's how we need to change our business as a result of this trend.
Can you give us an example of some common maybe themes or trends that you're referencing there?
Yeah, totally. So one really common thing, we work with a lot of clients in the enterprise software space. One theme that is often tagged is user interface and user experience, right? Some of our clients will have a really good user experience in the eyes of their buyers. Some of them will have a poor user experience. If you can find really actionable, detailed things about that, and you can say, look, in 20 out of 100 cases, user experience was a negative driver, and it influenced a lot of lost deals, then people can go back and say, oh, wow. And they look at the specific quotes around that and they see, oh, this is what people don't like about the user experience. So then it starts to become really granular and actionable, and you can see the scope of the issue. If you just look at it in one particular interview, you don't know, okay, is this just a one-off thing? Is it a trend? But having a methodology where you tag specific things can really make a difference.
Yeah, and we see common like overarching categories as maybe the word we would use for that. Like John, you gave a great example, like a really specific user experience and interface, that's actionable. Mm-hmm. We also see just some overarching categories around just product, maybe the sales experience, pricing and packaging,
support and
services, or marketing, company. So those are some of the common like overarching categories, and then we like to see what are maybe the sub themes or sub decision drivers that fall under those categories.
Yeah.
So
yeah, totally. And then it enables you to take this qualitative data and make it more quantitative and rigorous. So just having quotes is great, but then when you can start to show quantitative trends, you can start to show percentages, you can start to really show some interesting things that don't just come from a single interview, but you see trends across the interviews.
Yeah.
So, and then the final thing that we want to address, here's a gotcha, is clients, I shouldn't say clients, but anybody running a win-loss program, they'll keep the findings too close to them, right? They'll only share it with a couple of people instead of broadly sharing the insights across their organization. And I can tell you, we've seen it both ways, and it's way more effective when you share the insights broadly. If you want to actually get results out of what you have done, let as many people know about it as possible. Make it transparent. It makes a huge difference because one, people will start supporting you in the win-loss program, but more importantly, you'll start to get action out of it. People will start to see things that you didn't even anticipate because it's relevant to their part of the business or their part of the organization. And I mean, it's a huge differentiator.
Well, and it goes back to literally the first thing we talked about is the objectives and the buy-in from key stakeholders across the organization. Because if they're bought in from day one, they are also going to want to see the feedback, as you might imagine. And so being able to easily provide them access is just going to organically grow the program and allow you to get as much from the program as you possibly can. And so yeah, it's really interesting. We've worked with a lot of people and they just want to keep it close and like, I'll share this how I want. And those just don't do as well. We don't see as much organizational change from the win-loss insights when they just keep it close to themselves rather than, no, let's share this broadly. And the one caveat I think we will say with that is it depends on your organization. We have some clients that they want to give it to every user. They want to give access to everybody. We have multiple clients where they have hundreds and hundreds of users, and every time we publish a new interview, they're getting access to it. That works for their culture internally. Maybe there's some cultures where that wouldn't work as well because there is sometimes negative feedback that comes from these interviews. And so the one caveat is we would say maybe use your judgment on what's the internal culture around this type of openness and feedback. But what we have seen is just when you share it more, you're going to get a lot better results from your program.
Yeah, err on the side of openness for sure.
So, well, awesome. We hope you got some great insights from this. John and I, honestly, frankly, these are the things we talk about daily, probably with a few more swear words when we're talking at work of how to solve these for our current clients, because we know that these are the things that if our clients are doing these well, they're going to have a lot of success in the program. So we hope you can learn from our experience that we experience every day, and enjoy the rest of Win-Loss Week. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure.